There was no declaration of war, no ultimatum, no demand, no face to hate. It started with a hum. Not the kind you hear, the kind that wraps around your bones. A subsonic vibration, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient just beneath the surface of the world. It began in Antarctica, reverberating through seismic stations, creeping across tectonic plates. Then came the power failures, communications blackouts, the silence of satellites winking out one by one. And then people began to change. Not all at once, not dramatically. That was the genius of it. It started subtly, a blank stare here, a flicker of unresponsiveness there, a mother staring at her newborn without recognition, a police officer ignoring a robbery in progress, a teacher reciting lessons without variation, like a looped recording. By the end of the first week, 2 billion people had stopped being people. They were drones now, smiling, breathing, functional, but empty. Their eyes didn't track movement. Their limbs moved with mechanical precision. They obeyed anyone wearing the Hive signal mark, a flickering spiral visible only under infrared. Those who resisted were silenced, some taken, some erased. It wasn't an invasion. It was assimilation. And Earth was being rewritten. In the ruins of civilization, a network of survivors formed in secret. Scattered, terrified, and few. They were led not by generals, but by scientists, artists, musicians, people whose very nature rebelled against uniformity, against control. Deep below Vienna, once the home of classical mastery and orchestral brilliance, a forgotten Cold War bunker roared back to life. It had no name, just a frequency, 174.6 megahertz, broadcasting white noise to mask its location. Inside, the last embers of Earth's resistance flickered. And in the center of that bunker sat a man at a dusty grand piano. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even considered functional by pre-invasion standards. His name was Elias Voss, and he was deaf. Elias had been born with profound congenital deafness. He never heard a heartbeat, a voice, or the sound of his mother's lullaby. But somehow, his world was filled with music. By the age of 6, he had memorized the vibrations of every instrument by touch alone. By 12, he was composing symphonies that brought audiences to tears without ever hearing a single note. He described it as painting with pressure. Patterns were his language, imperfect rhythms, broken timings, the ghost between metronome clicks. His mind was tuned to chaos in a way no auditory brain ever could be. And now, that chaos might be humanity's only hope. Dr. Mira Chun, a neuroscientist turned revolutionary, stood silently in the observation chamber, watching Elias as he played. The piano was long dead, its strings rusted into stillness, its hammer snapped, its frame splintered. But Elias didn't care. His fingers hovered over the keys, tapping invisible notes onto cracked ivory. His head tilted, not listening, but feeling. The imaginary resonance in the bunker's concrete bones. "Has he slept?" one of the technicians asked, breaking the silence. "Not in 2 days," Mira replied, eyes fixed. "He doesn't need to. When he's like this, time stops for him." The tech frowned. "And you really think he can make a weapon?" "Not a weapon," she said softly. "A counter-frequency." The Hive's strength was in unity, neural resonance. Every drone, every ship, every thought, perfectly harmonized, like one vast symphony of control. A single node altered billions. Their pulse wasn't just sound. It was psychic rhythm, layered and invasive, hijacking thought through frequency. But Elias didn't hear the pulse. Couldn't. He was immune. And in that silence, he was composing dissonance. Not just noise. Not just static. Pure, beautiful wrongness. A pattern with no repetition. A signal with no symmetry. It was the audio equivalent of a painting that made you weep, but had no shape. A fractal with infinite imperfection. Something no Hive mind could comprehend, let alone assimilate. And if they couldn't understand it, they couldn't defend against it. Mira stepped into the room quietly, letting her boots echo slightly on the stone floor. Elias turned before she could speak, as if sensing her presence. His eyes, pale gray and intense, met hers. She signed. "How close?" He tapped 3 fingers on the wood. Then a pause. 2 more taps. 3 movements finished. 2 to go. Mira nodded, then hesitated. Her hand signed slowly. The hive's closing in. We need to test soon. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past her at the crumbling wall, where someone had spray-painted a question in red. What sound breaks silence? He stared at it for a moment, then turned back to the keys. His fingers moved again, and the bunker began to hum, not in sound but in feeling. A shift in pressure, a tightening in the chest, a vibration through metal and marrow. Every human in the facility stopped. The technicians froze. Even the lights flickered. And miles above them, in the sky still darkened by Hive craft, something paused. Something heard it. The next day came without sunrise. The skies above Vienna had long been choked by Hive drones, massive silver sentinels suspended like leeches over every major city. They blotted out the sun, pulsing with that same faint hum, a subharmonic lull that whispered, "Sleep, obey, forget." But beneath the city, in the bunker humming with the last wild heartbeat of human resistance, Elias Voss worked in silence. No lights, no audience, just him. The cracked keyboard hooked into a jury-rigged resonance chamber, and the ghosts of sound he built in his head. Each note he imagined had weight, an emotional texture. He didn't need to hear them. He felt them in the vibrations of the walls, in the metal of the stand, in his blood. It was a language beyond comprehension, beyond translation. It was war. Dr. Mirachin stood behind the blast glass partition, fingers trembling around a mug of synthetic coffee. She hadn't slept either. The lab behind her was alive with movement, engineers assembling crude amplifiers, neuroscientists calibrating neural dampeners, and armed security dragging in the subject for the test. It was locked in a reinforced chamber, a Hive drone. Not a ship, not a robot. A human once. He had been a musician, a jazz trumpeter named Ray Amin. Now his face was slack, his eyes glassy and unfocused. His limbs moved with inhuman precision, constantly twitching to some silent inner metronome. He sat chained, upright, unblinking. He didn't scream, didn't cry, just pulsed in place, head nodding to a beat no one else could hear. "I hate this part," Mira muttered. The test room was lined with leaded panels, anti-psychic filaments, and resonance-absorbing foam. Elias stepped in carrying only his keyboard, modified to link directly to the resonance emitter in the ceiling. Myra's voice came through the speakers. "Elias, this is Subject Delta 7. Target is fully synchronized with Hive command. Do not engage unless the pulse stabilizes under 0.5 Hertz. Understood?" Elias looked at the drone, raised shell, and nodded once. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The first sounds weren't even audible to most in the control room. They were distortions, low, crawling vibrations that made fillings buzz and stomachs twist. Tex turned pale. Some staggered from the room. Inside the test chamber, the drone flinched, its head tilted. Eyes blinked once. Elias shifted chords. The frequency twisted. Time signatures collapsed. Rhythm dissolved into something raw and primal. A sound that wasn't sound. A pattern that had never existed before. And the drone screamed. Not mechanically. Not like a weapon failing. It screamed in terror. The bindings rattled. Its arms flailed. Sparks burst from the node at the base of its skull. "Status." Mira barked. "Pulse desync at 68%. No weight, 84%. We're destabilizing the sync." The drone writhed, its mouth foaming, its skin pulsing with light. Then, in a sudden collapse, it fell forward limp. Silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the drone spoke. I can hear again." His voice was small, terrified, human. Mira gasped. "Get med team in there," she shouted, slamming the override. "He's back." Elias didn't celebrate. He just looked at the trembling man on the floor and touched the piano gently, as if to say, "Forgive me." 30 minutes later, the drone Ray sat in quarantine, eyes darting like a man pulled from deep water. "They were inside my thoughts," he whispered to Mira, clutching the thermal blanket. They weren't talking. They were singing. What kind of singing? She asked. Ray's hands shook as he tried to explain. Like monks humming in a cathedral built inside your skull. It wasn't words. It was feeling. Like I was just part of a chord. A single note. Were you aware? She pressed. I watched myself play for them. I played music that wasn't mine. I was proud of it, even while screaming inside. Mira stared at him. And Elias pulled you out of it. Ray nodded slowly. He broke the melody. Later, in the War Council chamber, little more than a damp stone meeting room with maps taped to the walls, Mira stood before the remaining resistance leadership. Operation Dissonance is no longer theory, she said. We've confirmed a 100% disruption rate on a Class 2 drone. The signal Elias created caused complete neural desynchronization within 60 seconds. What's the risk of backlash? Asked General Caro, one of the few ex-military left. Mira glanced at the data. Minimal. The sound destabilizes the Hive's grip, but doesn't damage human neurology. The only problem is scale. How do we weaponize it? She smiled faintly. Speakers. Old tech. Analog amplifiers. If we can wire Elias compositions through ground relays and orbital satellites, we might be able to create zones of dissidence, safe areas. From there, we strike. Caro leaned back. You want to fight a perfect mind with music? No, Mira corrected. Not music. Imperfection. Emotion. Chaos. The things they can't process. The things that make us human. That night, Elias sat alone in the dark room again. He had heard about Ray. About the tears. The memories returning. The fear. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow. Each key he touched held weight. Lives. Pressure. Hope. He didn't want to be a weapon. He wanted to be heard. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, allowed himself to feel. Not pattern. Not rhythm. Just raw feeling. And in that moment, a new idea bloomed. Something deeper. Simpler. Stronger. A melody without structure. A song of emotion without form. Something so chaotic it could shatter harmony itself. The first notes of his second movement. It was strange, Mirichin thought, how hope could sound like chaos. The first recording of Elias's prototype symphony, codenamed Dissonance 1, was unlike anything anyone had ever heard. Mira had it running through the lab's old analog audio equipment on a constant loop. Not to listen, but to feel. The waveform was broken, asymmetrical. It climbed when it should have fallen. It pulsed in bursts that didn't match any existing scale or tempo. Computers couldn't analyze it. Auto-tuners crashed trying to quantify the pitch. But it worked. Even the resistance personnel in the bunker reported side effects. Dreams filled with colors they couldn't describe. Memory flashes. Emotional spikes. And when they stepped outside into Hive Pulse territory, the hum felt less invasive. Dissonance. One was bleeding through the veil. And Mira was determined to turn it into Earth's first psychic defense system. The war room had been transformed into a lab. Equipment hauled from universities, scrapped research stations, and black market stores. Portable EMP-proof servers lined the walls. Old amplifiers, vacuum tube relics from forgotten music halls, sat beside quantum neurology gear. In the center stood Elias's original keyboard, now upgraded with tactile response pads and a neural feedback coil. Mira ran her hands over the schematics. We need to understand why this works before we scale it. If we pump the wrong frequency into the field, we could reinforce Hive's sync instead of breaking it. Elias watched her as she signed carefully. Then don't trust the math. Trust the soul. She frowned. We're fighting a species that turned thought into architecture. They'll adapt. Elias paused, then tapped out 5 fingers on the table unevenly. Tap, 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 tap. Chaos. Not disorder. Controlled chaos. Like jazz. Like the human mind. It clicked. Resonance-dissonance theory. The Hive functioned on a singular neural waveform, a perfect harmonic resonance that synchronized all infected minds through psionic wavelengths. It wasn't sound. Not in the traditional sense. It was psychic pressure, modulated by patterns that mimicked emotional states. Happiness, peace, loyalty, all synthetic, all transmitted. Mira hypothesized that the Hive didn't just suppress rebellion. It rewrote personality using musical emotion as a scaffold. Their entire empire was built on music, and Elias was rewriting the score. She presented her theory to the resistance leadership with a chalkboard full of chaotic symbols and a radio playing a soft segment of dissonance one. What we think of as noise, she explained, is incomprehensible to them. It breaks their frequency lock. It forces individuality. Someone raised a hand. So, Elias is like a psychic counter-virus. Mira nodded. Exactly. And if we can broadcast that virus wide enough, we may fracture the Hive's unity. And if it doesn't work, we go out in song. Scaling the symphony. The next step was engineering. The Hive's psychic signal blanketed the atmosphere in a near-constant, low-frequency hum, inaudible to most, but ever-present. It modulated thoughts subtly, like an emotional climate. Anger dulled. Curiosity faded. Compliance became easier. To fight it, the resistance needed to do what humanity always did best: get loud. They repurposed concert halls into amplifier stations. Theater organs became signal broadcasters. Old radio towers, long rusted and forgotten, were reborn as pillars of rebellion. And above it all, Elias Voss wrote. He never repeated a phrase, never recycled a pattern. Each new composition was more chaotic, more emotionally raw than the last. Not songs, experiences. One made the listener cry without knowing why. Another triggered uncontrollable laughter. One made several test subjects scream, and then say thank you. The Hive hated them all. The field test, Budapest. Budapest had gone silent weeks ago, overnight, without resistance. Every citizen taken. Every light extinguished. The Hive had set up a relay node in the heart of the old Parliament building. A psychic amplifier, 10 stories high, humming with invisible force. The resistance chose it for their first major test. A strike team was assembled. 10 soldiers, a mobile dissonance broadcast unit, and one reprogrammed Hive drone with just enough self-awareness to guide them past defenses. Their orders were simple. Deploy the transmitter. Activate dissonance, too. Survive long enough to see what happens. The night they arrived, it was raining. Not normal rain. The kind that seemed to fall in sync. Precise intervals. Perfect splashes. Even the weather felt engineered. They rolled the dissonance transmitter to the center of the plaza. A massive speaker rig mounted to a rusted tank chassis. A hummingbird-shaped antenna pointed skyward, trembling in the wet wind. "Ready to play the song?" asked Captain Varga, the team lead. The technician glanced at the keyboard, where Elias's second movement had been encoded into analog signal. "Ready." The switch flipped, and the city screamed. What the Hive hears. To human ears, dissonance, too, sounded like nothing. Just wind and rain. But to the Hive, it was a virus. The psychic network began to ripple. Harmony unraveled. For the first time in their collective memory, the Hive felt something they had no word for. Discord. Some drones fell instantly. Others twitched violently, spasming in place like puppets cut from strings. The Parliament amplifier began to spark. Then the Queen's node, embedded within the relay, emitted a banshee wail that shattered windows for kilometers. It was the sound of losing control. Back at the Vienna bunker, the team watched the footage on delay, stunned into silence. The field team made it out with 5 casualties. But the Hive node was dead. And for the first time since the invasion, the psychic hum in that city was gone. The war changes tune. The next day, the resistance transmitted a simple message on every available frequency. Vienna calling. The Hive bleeds. Music is our weapon. Join the dissonance. Across Earth, survivors emerged. Some cried. Some sang. Some banged pots together in wild, irregular rhythms, just to make noise the Hive couldn't track. From that moment on, every resistance broadcast ended the same way. A piece of Elias's music. Not all lived to hear it, but those who did felt something stir deep inside. A defiance beyond language. A will to be human. The silence didn't last. Not even 48 hours after the Budapest node fell, the Hive responded. It began with dreams. All over Earth, resistance fighters reported strange visions, waves of light, the feeling of being underwater, a lullaby in an alien tongue that echoed inside their skulls. At first, it was dismissed as stress. Then people started vanishing, not from the front lines, from the bunkers, from safe zones, snatched without a trace. Dr. Mirachin noticed it first, a pattern in the disappearances. Not random, not strategic. Musicians, artists, writers, anyone tied to chaos. And at the center of the storm, Elias Voss. In the Vienna bunker, security had doubled overnight. Mira hadn't slept in 20 hours. The air was thick with solder smoke from makeshift upgrades, the hum of failing generators, and the constant chatter of analysts trying to outguess a mind that thought in chords. "Why artists?" one of the new technicians asked. Mira pinched the bridge of her nose, exhausted. "Because artists feel. They generate emotional dissonance. The Hive needs silence to control. Anything unpredictable threatens their unity." She paused, then added, "And Elias is the most unpredictable thing we have." Elias sat in his chamber with his hands hovering over the keys, unmoving. His face was paler than usual, his jaw clenched. Something had changed in him since the Budapest broadcast. He felt it. The Queen's eyes. They weren't watching through cameras or drones. They were in the music now. He could feel them pulsing behind each note, trying to anticipate the next, trying to understand him. He began to compose, not in notes, but in defense. A wall of chaos. Something too jagged to replicate, too raw to copy. He called it Movement 3, Requiem for Control. The Hive strikes. It came at 2:17 local time. The bunker's seismic alarms screamed as the ground trembled. Outside, Vienna's skyline turned white with descending Hive tendrils, bioorganic drills made of living metal and muscle, spiraling into the city's foundations. The Hive wasn't hunting the resistance anymore. They were hunting Elias. Gunfire erupted through the tunnels. Drones, not converted humans, but pure Hive constructs, poured in through breach points with needle limbs and shimmering eyes that glowed like dying stars. Mira grabbed a rifle and sprinted to Elias's chamber. "Move him. Now," she shouted. Her voice drowned in alarm klaxons. 2 guards flanked Elias, pulling him from the bench, but he resisted, shaking his head, fingers pointing back at the keyboard. He wasn't done. Down the hall, a drone shattered through a steel bulkhead like paper. 1 guard went down screaming. The other fired until the magazine clicked dry. But the thing kept coming. Elias, hands trembling, yanked the keyboard onto the floor. No power, no amplification, just raw signal. He played. The sound barely carried, but the drone froze mid-stride, twitching, convulsing, its metallic limbs flailing like it was drowning in air. Elias struck harder, breaking keys under his fists. The drone dropped, and for 1 heartbeat, the Hive faltered. Mira stared, stunned. "Get the backup copy," she yelled. "We're getting him out now." They loaded Elias and the hard drive containing Movement 3 onto a transport rigged with directional speakers and outdated radar scramblers. As the bunker collapsed behind them, Mira turned one last time. The entrance was caved in, but from deep within the rubble, a single note played, Elias's final keypress echoing like a heartbeat. On the run, the resistance went dark for a week. Vienna was gone. 10 bunkers lost. Hundreds dead or assimilated. The Hive didn't just retaliate, they purged. Elias, Mira, and a small mobile command team fled through old rail tunnels beneath the Alps, moving from one hidden station to another. The broadcast stopped. The world felt quiet again. Too quiet. Some survivors whispered that Elias was dead. Others said he had gone mad. But inside a freezing, abandoned observatory near the Swiss border, Elias worked. His hands were bloodied, fingernails cracked, eyes sunken. He hadn't spoken, hadn't even signed in days. Mira brought him food, which he ignored. "Please," she begged once, kneeling beside him. "You can't carry this alone." But Elias wasn't carrying it. He was becoming it. The Hive Queen listens. Far above Earth, Aboard the crown ship orbiting the planet, the Hive Queen stirred. She wasn't a being in the way humans understood. She was presence. Thought made flesh. Billions of minds singing in perfect unity. A god of chords. And she was no longer sure of her victory. The composer had created something she didn't understand. Not just resistance, but infection. His music wasn't just noise. It was emotional anarchy. Each time a broadcast aired, her drones faltered. Worse, they began to feel. Some remembered names. Others stopped responding to the pulse. The Queen shifted her focus. She would not destroy the composer. She would consume him. His chaos would become her own. The second movement begins. Elias finally spoke. His voice a cracked whisper through dry lips. He's not fighting them, he told Mira, without looking up. He's rewiring them, making them think. Who? She asked. He stared blankly at the wall. Me. Mira sat down beside him. Then we need to finish the second movement. He shook his head. It's not mine anymore. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small drive. Handwritten in smudged ink, MVD3 final. I wrote the end. Now it needs the beginning. He placed the drive into her hand. Broadcast it, but don't aim it at them. Mira frowned. Then who? He looked up, eyes hollow but burning. The ones who've already surrendered. War had always been waged with bullets and bombs. But now Earth fought back with music. Not music to soothe or uplift. Not songs of hope. But weapons, audio viruses, crafted by a deaf man, amplified by relic tech, and delivered like airstrikes into the heart of the Hive. The broadcast begins. The Resistance's engineers dubbed it Project Siren, a global network of speaker arrays, satellite relays, and old Earth orbit towers reprogrammed to broadcast Elias's second movement at full psychic intensity. At 6 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, every array on Earth lit up. From the broken streets of London to the salt-rusted antennae in Jakarta, it played. Movement 2. Requiem for Control. The piece was barely recognizable as music. To the untrained ear, it sounded like corrupted symphony being played backward through a broken film projector. But to the Hive, it was a scalpel. The Hive screams. In Berlin, drones turned their weapons on each other, twitching in confusion. In Lagos, a swarm of aerial units plummeted from the sky like stunned wasps. In Rio, 3,000 mind-controlled civilians dropped to their knees mid-march and wept, uncontrollably, incoherently. Some screamed. Others whispered names they hadn't spoken in years. The Queen's pulse began to fluctuate. What had once been a clean, global signal was now fractured, discordant. Fractals of emotion tore across the network like a plague. And still, the music played. The human heart responds. For the first time since the invasion, cities lit up. People emerged from bunkers, homes, cellars. Some wore rags. Others bore scars, psychic and physical. But all of them heard the same impossible truth in the symphony. They were not alone. One child in Delhi tapped a spoon against a pot, in sync with the rhythm. An old woman in Siberia banged her walker on concrete in time with the chaos. A resistance squad in Los Angeles carried portable speakers into Hive territory, playing Elias's movement at full volume, marching into the fog with defiant grins. Across the globe, spontaneous rhythms emerged, drums, stomps, claps. Not rehearsed, not refined, just human. Counter-Strike, the Battle of Berlin. It became the first organized assault since the Vienna collapse. Berlin was still held by a central Hive amplifier. If the Resistance could destroy it, the entire Western network would collapse. Resistance Command dispatched an elite task force, Echo Squad, with a new prototype, the dissonance bomb. The bomb wasn't explosive. It was harmonic, containing a concentrated burst of Elias's most violent frequencies. Delivery was simple. Get it into the central node. Play it. Survive. The squad approached under cover of a false Hive signal. Myra's team had cracked enough of the code to mimic comm. At 14:04 local time, the Echo squad breached the central node and placed the device. The Hive drones converged instantly, but before they could strike, the bomb played. The node collapsed into pure noise. The central tower vibrated so violently it exploded outward, shattering drone coordination across the entire region. Berlin went dark. Resistance troops stormed in and met no organized resistance. The Queen bleeds. Far above Earth, the Hive Queen reeled. Her perfect mind was a symphony no longer. The chorus of trillions now had dissonance, like screaming violins beneath a choir. She reached out across her remaining nodes and tried to purge the infection, but it was already too late. She had miscalculated. Emotion was not just a weakness, it was contagious. And Elias was the carrier. Meanwhile, Elias fades. In the Swiss observatory, Elias sat quietly in a wheelchair near a frost-covered window. His hands trembled. His eyes flickered. His neural scan showed signs of psychic overload. His brain had been touched by the Hive's pulse too many times, resisting through sheer will. But now it was catching up to him. Mira watched helplessly as he began to lose contact with the present. Some days he stared into space, mouthing rhythms silently. Other days, he scrawled incomplete notes across the walls, shaking and sobbing. He had written the second movement, but he would not survive the third. A message to the world. Before slipping fully into silence, Elias gave Mira a final message, through sign language, his hands weak and shaking. They think perfection is strength, but perfection is fragile. Shatter one note, and the whole system cracks. He tapped her chest gently. You have the rhythm now. Make them feel it. He pressed a final chip into her palm. Movement 3, Symphony of Strangers. Then he closed his eyes and slept. From resistance to revolution, the resistance rebranded overnight. No longer a hidden remnant, now a rising tide. Broadcasts no longer just carried strategy. They carried Elias's music. New composers emerged, taking inspiration from his patterns and injecting their own emotions, love, grief, rage, humor, into the signals. Each new symphony became a front line. Each new broadcast broke another node. And slowly, surely, the Hive began to fracture. Not from bombs, but from humanity. The Queen was no longer calm. The perfect rhythm of her empire, a harmony unbroken across millennia, was corrupted. Not by technology, not by military strength, but by a deaf man with a broken piano and a soul that couldn't be tamed. She did not understand what he was, but she would. The psychic bridge, in the depths of her crown ship, orbiting Earth like a parasite moon, the Queen stood at the center of her neural core, a spiraling cathedral of light and thought. Beneath her, drones floated in stasis, millions of them humming the original pulse, calm, perfect, enslaved. But that song was dying. Whole nodes now buzzed with discord. Drones muttered nonsense, sobbed, laughed. Some began speaking their own names. Unacceptable. She needed to excise the infection. And that meant one thing. Contact. The dream trap. Elias Voss was sleeping. At least his body was. In truth, he was fading. His brain, scarred by psychic exposure, hovered between waking and coma. Doctors called it a neural meltdown. But the Queen saw opportunity. In that vulnerability, she built a bridge, a neural tunnel between minds. No pain, no torture, just one final attempt to consume him, understand him. And so, deep in his unconscious mind, she entered. The mindscape. It was not what she expected. There were no walls, no order, just fragments of sound floating in the dark, discordant rhythms, memories colliding with hallucinations. She moved through a music hall with no roof, a battlefield made of piano keys, a storm of laughter that echoed like thunder. And then she saw him, Elias Voss, standing on a stage surrounded by smoke, his face pale and flickering like an old film reel. He looked at her and smiled. The Queen speaks. You are flawed. Her voice rippled through the dream. Incomplete. Deaf. Elias tilted his head. In the dreamscape, he could hear. And he laughed. Wrong. I'm the only one not listening to you. She stepped forward, her form a swirling column of alien flesh and glowing eyes. You resist perfection. No, he said. I reject it. She flared, her voice shaking the stars in the sky. We offered you unity, peace, order. You mean silence. He waved a hand, and the space around him changed, an exploding kaleidoscope of color and noise. I like noise. The test. The Queen conjured a memory, Elias's mother's face, dead for decades, smiling now in eerie stillness. Then his childhood piano burning. Then Mira crying in the rubble. She twisted them, corrupted them, tried to bend him with pain. You feel, she hissed. So I will use that. You are a weakness. Elias trembled, then laughed. I feel everything. That's my strength. And then he began to play. The counter-infection. In the dream, he sat at a grand piano made of broken bones and neon wires. His fingers hit impossible notes, notes that warped the dream itself. The sky fractured. The Queen screamed. Because it wasn't just music. It was her own mind fracturing. Elias wasn't just resisting. He was playing her. Each note he struck warped her form, ripping pieces of the hive from her core and scattering them into the void. Drones disconnected. Nodes collapsed. Thoughts once bound in harmony began to unravel. She tried to shut the link, but he grinned and played louder. Her first tear. Then Elias struck a final note, a single, perfect imperfection. A pause. A silence that felt like falling. And from the Queen's towering form, a single glowing drop fell. A tear. She didn't understand it. What is this? He whispered, grief. Yours. The Hive Queen, for the first time, felt alone. She screamed, and the mindscape shattered. Back in the observatory, Elias convulsed in the bed. Mira and the medics rushed in, alarms wailing. His eyes opened, wide and full of tears. He gasped. I was inside her head. Mira leaned closer. And, he whispered, she's afraid of being alone. The result, every Hive ship above Earth flared with psychic static. Some crashed. Others stopped mid-flight. On the ground, drones collapsed in masses, clutching their heads. The Queen had felt a fracture in herself. Her song was no longer whole. Elias's final plan. He was fading fast now, neurons dying by the hour, but he had seen inside her, and he knew what came next. She'll isolate. Retreat, he told Mira. She'll try to rewrite herself. Clean the infection. We can't let her, she said. He handed her one final chip. Movement 4. What is it? A duet, he said with a fading smile. Me and her. The Queen had lost half her network. Entire Hive nodes now buzzed with disobedience, drone units whispering names, individuals crying alone, memory and emotion creeping back into once pure minds. Her control was unraveling, and at the center of it all was Elias Voss. He had touched her mind, and left behind a crack. Now, she would finish this herself. The abduction. It happened without warning. At 3:14 local time, just after the medical team sedated Elias for brain stabilization, the entire observatory shuddered. A blinding violet light split the room apart. Gravity folded inward. Mira and the guards were flung back against the walls, screaming. Time itself seemed to ripple like water. Then Elias was gone. No explosion. No portal. Just a breathless vacuum and absence. The Queen had taken him. Inside the crown ship. He awoke on a floating slab of warm metal, surrounded by silence. No beeping machines. No air. Just the slow, aching hum of the Hive Queen's throne. She stood above him, no longer a projection, but her true form. 10 meters tall. Fluid. Silver black. Dozens of eyes blinked across her shifting face. You are the flaw, she said, not in words, but directly into his neurons. I'm the composer. Elias whispered, weak. Then compose your surrender. She opened 1,000 memories at once. His entire past played before him like a shattered film. His mother's funeral. His first concert. Every moment of silence he endured alone. And she twisted them, fed sorrow back into his heart, tried to overwrite him. But he didn't break. He laughed, quiet and broken but real. You can't steal what was never yours. The Queen's mistake. In trying to dominate Elias's mind, the Queen made a fatal miscalculation. She let him in again, and this time, Elias didn't come as a guest. He came with a purpose. He came with movement 4. The duet begins. The fourth movement wasn't a broadcast. It was a neural implant, a psychic duet, designed to play inside her mind. As she reached into his core, the music unfolded like a virus wrapped in beauty. It wasn't chaos this time. It was human sorrow. It was the sound of grieving for lost friends, the quiet pain of isolation, the bittersweet joy of remembering a song your mother once sang. The queen staggered. "No," she growled, struggling. But the notes kept coming. She was now the instrument, and Elias was playing her. The resistance responds. In the resistance's last stronghold, an underground city beneath Norway, Mira received a garbled signal from Elias's final neural transmitter. Just 6 words. "She's listening. Play it loud." Without hesitation, she initiated broadcast Omega. It would push the global amplifier grid beyond safe limits. Satellites would burn, towers would melt, but the full force of Movement 4 would reach every drone, every skyship, every corner of Hive territory. The planet itself would sing. The final broadcast. The music was nothing like the earlier movements. It was quiet, gentle, mournful. Strings wept. Pianos fluttered. A human heartbeat, slowly fading, echoed beneath it all. And inside the queen's throne, Elias wept too. He wasn't afraid. He had written this ending. He had made peace with silence. But the queen hadn't. She screamed as the song reached its crescendo, not in rage, but in terror. Emotion flooded her. Billions of suppressed minds came crashing back. Not all at once, but enough. The hive began to die. Not with violence, but with feeling. Elias's last note. His body finally failed. Heart stilled. Breath stopped. But as his consciousness unraveled, the final note played inside the queen's mind. A single imperfect rhythm. A heartbeat. And then, silence. Aftermath. Across Earth, Hive ships fell from the sky. Drones collapsed, awakening days or weeks later with tears in their eyes and memories of dreams. Cities awoke. Broadcasts resumed. And for the first time in decades, the hum was gone. Myra's final message. Standing atop the rebuilt Vienna Tower, now converted into a monument, Dr. Mirachin addressed the world. "We didn't win this war with guns. We won with grief, with stubbornness, with noise." Elias Voss didn't just break the hive. He taught them to feel, and in doing so, he made them human. The war ended without a treaty. No ceremony, no surrender, just silence. The kind that comes after a storm. The kind that lets you finally hear your own breath again. The sky was ours again. In the days that followed Elias's final broadcast, the skies began to clear. The great hive ships, some thousands of kilometers wide, drifted silently across the upper atmosphere like forgotten gods. No longer hunting, no longer controlled. One by one they fell, not in flames, but in slow, silent descents, graceful and tragic, as if even they grieved. Earth's surface was scarred. Cities were rubble. Oceans had boiled in places. But humanity was still here. And for the first time, truly awake. The drones who lived. They awoke in forests and sewers, in the ruins of cities they once helped conquer, once connected to a perfect mind, now lost inside their own. They remembered fragments, snatches of the Queen's song, names they once had, crimes they didn't choose. Some wept for days. Others built shrines to the music that had saved them. The resistance, now the Reclamation Front, offered amnesty to all who had been enslaved. Most were accepted. A few chose silence, walking into the wilderness. But one thing was always the same. Every drone remembered Elias. Not his face, not his music, but how they felt when they first heard the heartbeat. The Queen. No one knew if she survived. The crown ship remained adrift in high orbit, unmanned, silent, its core shattered. But sometimes, on moonless nights, faint pulses still flickered across its surface. Not the perfect hum of the past. Something else. A broken rhythm. A lone voice, repeating a single tone, over and over, as if learning to sing alone. Myra's archive. Dr. Mirachin never left Earth. She turned the remains of the Swiss observatory into a living memorial. Inside, the original cracked keyboard was preserved in crystal. Surrounding it, she built a vast library of human sound, not of music theory or recorded works, but of raw expressions. Babies crying, laughter during war, screams of defiance, a blind child playing spoons on metal. These sounds weren't composed. They were lived. She believed this was Elias's true legacy, not the notes, but the emotions they carried. A new art. Across the galaxy, something strange began to happen. Other hive seed colonies, long isolated, began sending signals. At first, they were disjointed, glitches in the void. But then they started playing music. Not like the Queen's old pulse. Real music. Chaotic. Beautiful. Imperfect. It spread like a second revolution, the infection of emotion. Somewhere in that deep black silence, old hive minds had heard Elias's echo, and they were trying to understand. The final message. 5 years after the war, one of the orbiting probes monitoring the crown ship returned with a message. It was short, a waveform, low fidelity, repeating. When engineers cleaned it, amplified it, and ran it through Elias's harmonic decoder, it played 4 notes, then silence, then a fifth, offbeat, human. The world stood still, not because it was music, but because it meant only one thing. She was still listening. And in the end, no statues were built of Elias Voss. He never wanted fame. But everywhere, on ruined walls, in cities reborn, in old radios now patched together with hope, his music lived on. Children hummed it in broken tune. Grandmothers tapped their canes in time. And when people asked, "How did we survive the hive?" they were told, because a deaf man taught the universe how to feel. What if a single human song could end a war? If this story struck a chord, like, share, and subscribe for more epic human versus alien sci-fi that proves our greatest weapon is soul. Drop a comment. What emotion would you weaponize against the hive?